Most gardeners don't have a plant problem. They have a decision problem. They're making choices based on guesswork, outdated advice, and habits passed down without question. And the result is predictable stunted growth, inconsistent yields, nutrient deficiencies that look like diseases, and harvests that never quite match the effort. If you've ever watered on a schedule instead of based on actual soil conditions or added fertilizer just to be safe, you've already seen the consequences. Plants don't respond to intentions, they respond to conditions. And traditional gardening often ignores that completely. What's happening now is a quiet shift. Smart growers aren't necessarily abandoning soil or backyard gardens, but they are abandoning the idea that gardening should be intuitive guesswork. They're moving toward controlled, measurable systems where every input, water, nutrients, light, is based on real data, not assumptions. Whether that's in raised beds, containers, or hydroponics, the principle is the same. Control the environment and the plants will reward you. The biggest turning point for most growers comes when they realize that soil is not a fixed medium. It's a dynamic system that changes daily. Moisture levels fluctuate with temperature, microbial activity shifts based on organic matter, and pH can drift depending on what you add. This is where something like a digital soil, moisture and pH meter becomes a game changer. I've used one across raised beds, grow bags, and even indoor setups, and it completely changes how you interact with your garden. Instead of watering because it's been 2 days, you water because the soil actually needs it. I'll link it in the description below. That single shift eliminates overwatering, which is probably the most common mistake in traditional gardening. Now let's talk about watering, because this is where traditional methods fail the most. The idea that plants need a fixed schedule every morning or every other day is not just wrong, it's harmful. In a raised bed with a mix of compost, cocoa coir, and perlite, water retention behaves completely differently than in native soil. On a hot day, the top 2 inches might look dry while the root zone is still saturated. If you water again, you're essentially suffocating the roots. When I started checking moisture levels before watering, I reduced my watering frequency by almost 40%, and my plants actually grew faster because the roots had access to oxygen. This shift toward precision also changes how you fertilize. Traditional gardening advice often pushes blanket feeding schedules. Add compost every few weeks, use liquid fertilizer once a month, and hope for the best. But plants don't consume nutrients on a calendar. They respond to growth stages and environmental conditions. For example, leafy greens like spinach or kale need more nitrogen early on, but if you keep feeding high nitrogen, when temperatures rise, you'll get bitter leaves and bolting. In contrast, fruiting plants like tomatoes need a balanced nutrient profile early, then higher potassium during flowering and fruiting. In hydroponic systems, this is obvious because everything is controlled, but the same logic applies to soil. Smart growers are starting to treat soil like a semi-controlled system, adjusting inputs based on feedback rather than routine. Even something as simple as checking pH can reveal why a plant isn't thriving. If your soil pH drifts above 7.5, nutrients like iron and phosphorus become less available, even if they're present. That's when you see yellowing leaves and assume a deficiency when it's actually a pH lockout. Raised beds are where this shift becomes most visible. Traditional gardeners often fill beds with whatever soil is available and rely on compost to fix everything. But, experienced growers are now building soil mixes with specific ratios, something like 40% compost, 30% cocoa coir, and 30% aeration material like perlite or pumice. This creates a balance between water retention and drainage, which is critical for root health. Once that balance is in place, tools like the soil meter become even more valuable because you're working within a predictable system. Another major change is how people approach plant spacing and density. Traditional advice often emphasizes giving plants plenty of room, but that can actually reduce efficiency. In a well-managed system, slightly tighter spacing can create a microclimate that retains moisture and suppresses weeds. For example, Planting lettuce at 15 centimeters spacing instead of 25 centimeters can increase yield per square meter without sacrificing quality, as long as you're managing water and nutrients correctly. This is where precision matters, because tighter spacing means less margin for error. Hydroponics takes this concept even further, which is why so many growers are experimenting with it. In a simple, deep water culture system, you're delivering oxygenated nutrient solution directly to the roots, eliminating soil variability altogether. But even here, the principles carry over. You're monitoring pH, adjusting nutrient concentration, and observing plant response. It's not about abandoning traditional gardening entirely, it's about adopting the mindset of control and feedback. One thing that often surprises people is how much time this actually saves. Traditional gardening feels simple, but it often leads to constant troubleshooting. Why are the leaves yellowing? Why is growth slow? Why did this plant fail? When you start measuring and adjusting, those problems become predictable and preventable. Using the soil meter, for example, I can walk through a garden in minutes and identify which areas need attention. That's far more efficient than reacting to visible symptoms after the damage is already done. There's also a shift in how growers think about sustainability. Traditional methods often rely heavily on inputs, more compost, more fertilizer, more water, to compensate for poor management. Smart growers are reducing inputs by optimizing conditions. If your soil retains moisture properly, you use less water. If your pH is balanced, you need fewer amendments. If your plants are healthy, they're more resistant to pests and diseases, reducing the need for interventions. Even pest management is changing. Instead of reacting to infestations, experienced growers are focusing on plant health and environmental balance. Strong, well-fed plants are less attractive to pests, and diverse planting can disrupt pest cycles. For example, interplanting basil with tomatoes can help deter certain insects, but it works best when both plants are thriving. Again, it comes back to conditions. Another area where traditional gardening falls short is season extension. Many gardeners simply accept that growing is limited to certain months, but smart growers are using techniques like mulching, row covers, and even simple greenhouse setups to extend their seasons. In a small backyard, adding a layer of mulch can stabilize soil temperature and moisture, allowing you to plant earlier in the spring and harvest later into the fall. Monitoring soil conditions with a meter helps you understand exactly when it's safe to plant, rather than relying on calendar dates. What's really happening here is a shift from reactive gardening to proactive gardening. Instead of waiting for problems to appear, you're creating conditions that prevent them. And once you experience that, it's hard to go back. You start to see traditional methods for what they are, well-intentioned, but often inefficient and inconsistent. This doesn't mean you need expensive equipment or a full hydroponic setup. It means adopting a mindset of observation, measurement, and adjustment. Start small. Check your soil moisture before watering. Pay attention to how your plants respond to changes. Use tools that give you real feedback. Even something as simple as that soil meter can reveal patterns you never noticed before, like which areas of your garden dry out faster or how different soil mixes behave. Over time, these small changes add up. Your plants grow more consistently, your yields improve, and gardening becomes less about effort and more about strategy. That's why smart growers are moving away from traditional methods, not because they're trendy, but because they work better. If you want to grow better food, it starts with understanding what your plants actually need and giving it to them precisely. That's the difference between guessing and knowing, between hoping and achieving. And once you make that shift, tools like the soil meter stop being optional. They become part of how you think about gardening. If you found this useful, subscribe and share this with someone who's serious about improving their garden. Because better growing isn't about doing more, it's about doing things right. And once you start working with real data instead of assumptions, even a simple tool like that soil meter becomes one of the most valuable things in your entire setup.